History has a way of turning men into marble. We see George Washington as the stoic father of a nation, the general on the horse, the face on the dollar bill. But before the white wig and the presidency, there was a young man struggling to find his place in an untamed world. Before he was the commander, he was a surveyor, a soldier, and a dreamer. Today we explore the formative, often dangerous years of the man who would eventually build a legacy from the ground up. This is the untold story of the young Washington. Born in 1732, Washington did not grow up in the halls of power. By age 16, he was already out on the frontier, working as a surveyor. This wasn't just a job, it was an education in grit. In the wild Virginia backcountry, Washington learned the topography of the land that he would one day lead. He encountered diverse cultures and harsh climates that forced him to mature far beyond his years. This period stripped away the illusions of high society, replacing them with the practical knowledge of survival and logistics. As tensions flared between competing empires, the frontier became a powder keg. Washington found himself thrust into the center of a geopolitical struggle that would eventually ignite a global conflict. Young Washington was not a perfect strategist from the start. He made mistakes that carried heavy consequences. Those early failures were the forge in which his leadership was tempered. He learned the brutal reality of warfare while navigating the complex alliances of the time. What defined these years wasn't just his military actions, it was his character. Washington was obsessed with the idea of honor. He kept a book of 110 rules of civility, guiding his behavior in every interaction. He was driven by a burning ambition to rise in status, moving beyond his modest beginnings. Even when faced with extreme hardship, he maintained a sense of discipline that set him apart from his peers. This was a man who felt the pressure of destiny long before the rest of the world knew his name. By the end of these early years, the boy who surveyed land had become a man capable of surveying the future of a continent. Every experience, the cold nights in the woods, the failures in battle, the social climbing, was a step toward 1776. History remembers the outcome, but the true drama lies in these formative years. The transition from an ambitious youth to the founding father was defined by growth, regret, and relentless pursuit. Washington's story reminds us that legends aren't born. They are constructed through years of trial and error. The next time you look at the face of George Washington, remember the young man who once walked the same wild trails we see today. He was not always a legend. He was a man who chose to become one. Thank you for joining us on this look at the early life of a titan of history. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the figures who shaped our world.
Welcome to This Explainer. You know, history has this really funny habit of taking dynamic, completely flawed human beings and freezing them into cold, perfect marble. I mean, when we think of George Washington, we almost instantly picture the stoic father of a nation, right? The majestic general on the horse, or, let's be honest, just the very serious face staring back at us from a $1 bill. But our goal today is to totally deconstruct that myth. We're going to peel back the layers and uncover the gritty, dangerous, and honestly largely untold story of his youth. Because long before the presidency and the fame, there was a young guy who actually chose to become a legend.
Okay, let's dive right into this. There is just a massive night-and-day contrast between the white-wigged icon we all read about in textbooks and the actual reality of his early years. We're talking about a young, super ambitious man who was genuinely struggling to find his place in a completely untamed world. Before he was the commander of, well, anything, he was a surveyor out in the brutal elements. He was a soldier highly prone to making huge errors, and a dreamer desperately trying to carve out a name for himself.
Part 1. The Teenage Frontier Surveyor.
So, Washington was born in 1732, and he absolutely did not grow up walking the hollowed halls of power. Actually, his most formative education was found out in the wild, and I really want you to let this number sink in. 16. By the age of 16, George Washington was already working professionally as a surveyor out in the incredibly wild, dangerous Virginia backcountry. Just imagine the sheer level of responsibility and danger involved for a literal teenager in that era. He was out there navigating uncharted forests with primitive tools.
And, this wasn't just a summer job for him. It was a brutal, hands-on education in pure grit. Out in that backcountry, he was forced to mature way beyond his years. He was learning the exact topography of the very land he'd one day be tasked to lead. He encountered diverse cultures, he survived punishing, harsh climates. Honestly, this environment completely stripped away any delicate illusions of high society. In their place, he learned the hard, practical logistics of survival.
Part 2. Forged in Fire and Failure.
Now, right around this time, the American frontier was rapidly transforming into this intense geopolitical powder keg. Massive competing global empires were starting to clash over territory, and look at how rapid this escalation of responsibility really was for him. He goes from a boy born far from power in 1732, to a teenage surveyor in the woods, to a young adult suddenly thrust straight into the center of a geopolitical struggle that would eventually ignite a global conflict. It is a stunningly fast trajectory toward destiny, eventually culminating in 1776.
But here is the absolutely crucial point. During this rapid ascent, young Washington was absolutely not a perfect strategist. It's so important to humanize him here. He made major mistakes early in his military career. Take his disastrous surrender at Fort Necessity, for example. And those mistakes carried incredibly heavy, deadly consequences. He wasn't just born with innate tactical perfection. Not at all. He was figuring it out in real time, and honestly, he was often failing.
But these very failures, they became his crucible. It started with those costly strategic errors, which forced him to scramble and learn how to navigate complex, constantly shifting alliances. And ultimately, it taught him the brutal, unforgiving reality of warfare. It was intense trial and error, but it was exactly this forge that tempered his leadership. Every single mistake was a harsh lesson that hardened his resolve.
Part 3. The Architecture of Character.
So what truly defined his early years wasn't just the military action, it was his intense internal drive and how he deliberately molded his own personality. If there's one single word to define young Washington, it's honor. It was a driving obsession for him. He possessed this burning ambition to rise in status, to aggressively move beyond his modest beginnings through social climbing and undeniable merit. Bottom line, he wanted to be a man of consequence. And to achieve that honor, he relied on this very specific number, 110. Now, this wasn't just some random figure. This represented a highly meticulous method he used for constructing his character from the absolute ground up.
He actually kept a book detailing 110 rules of civility. And we're talking about everything from deep moral tenets to highly specific warnings against, spitting into the fire. He used them to rigorously guide his behavior in every single interaction. Think about the intense self-discipline required here. Even when he was facing extreme hardships, freezing out in the wilderness, or dealing with major military defeats, he maintained this strict code of conduct. It completely set him apart from his peers.
This relentless, almost exhausting level of discipline shows us a man who felt the heavy weight and pressure of destiny long before the rest of the world even knew his name. He was preparing himself for a grand stage, practically rehearsing the part of a great leader before he actually was one.
Part 4. Constructing a Legend.
This is where the flawed soldier and the incredibly disciplined rule follower finally merge. The boy who simply surveyed plots of land out in the Virginia woods transformed into a man capable of surveying the future of an entire continent. Every single experience he had, every freezing cold night under the stars, every bitter regret on the battlefield, all of his intense social climbing, every bit of it was a direct, totally necessary step towards 1776.
History ultimately just remembers the successful outcome. But the true drama, that lies in those formative years. The transition from an ambitious youth to a founding father was defined by immense growth, heavy regret, relentless pursuits, and agonizing trial and error. The core takeaway here is that legends are never simply born. They are painstakingly constructed through hardship, failure, and sheer will.
So, I leave you with this question. Who are you going to see on the dollar bill now? The next time you look at that famous image, I really challenge you to look past the stoic marble myth. Remember the gritty, highly ambitious, and flawed young man walking those wild trails. Because he wasn't always a legend, he was a man who deliberately chose to become one. I hope this explainer completely changes how you view this titan of history. Thank you so much for learning with me today.